Hey there, it's Silver. So this is going to be a double feature of a couple of really fun classic roguelikes that have recently either come out as 1.0 or have just released in general. So classic roguelikes and I have a really long history because I can still remember browsing around BBS's and trying to find new ones to download because roguelikes were always free and they had all sorts of gameplay styles and things that made them really interesting to try out as a kid. And it's been really cool to watch that style of game sort of evolve in various different directions and become all sorts of other things. But at the same time as all of those have been evolving, we've also had the still classic, more general way of doing roguelikes that is the same as in the past, and they have also been updated into the modern world. So we've seen stuff like Dungeons of Dreadmore or Cogmind, for instance, as commercial roguelikes in the classic style. And these two are inspired by things like Tome and possibly even each other as really good just examples of how to do a really sort of ability-focused, highly varied roguelike. And so the first one we're going to take a look at is Rift Wizard 2. Rift Wizard 2 is, well, it's basically chess, except you only have a queen, and all your other pieces are represented by different spells you can cast. Effectively, you are given a board where you can see the entire screen all at once. It doesn't scroll, so you always have a full view of everything on the level all at one time. And you can plop yourself down literally anywhere you want. You can click any tile and start there. Of course, there are places that you might not want to start because they're surrounded by angry dragons or something, but still you can start wherever depending on the strategy that you're using. And then it's your job to completely clear the screen. Just sweep through, kill everything, destroy all the spawners, and then eventually collect all of the rewards and make it to the next rift. So it's a pretty simple idea from the outset, but you'll very quickly find that it gets extremely difficult, like blindingly hard sometimes, because it really expects you to heavily strategize and take your time. So the way that it works is it starts out pretty simple for you. You'll begin in a basic screen and you'll have one SP. SP are what you use to purchase basically everything, because the way that this game's building works is that you have full control over pretty much everything that you have, from spells to equipment to passive abilities and things. None of these are randomly generated for you. Instead, they're things that you actually purchase or choose in the case of equipment. But at any time while playing, you can open up a spell list, and this will show you every single spell in the game, of which there are about 8 quadrillion, and you can just scroll through and look at all of them. And they all have really nice detailed descriptions that tell you everything you need to know about them. And the really cool thing about this game's sort of tactics and stuff is it's all very transparent. It doesn't hide anything from you or give you a bunch of like complicated equations for figuring out how damage works or anything like that. If a spell says it deals 9 damage, then it deals 9 damage pretty much every time. But of course, at first, when you just start out with the 1 spell point, you'll only be able to purchase spells that cost 1 point. So not that many of them, although there are still a surprising number of options at the very beginning that you can choose from, and this is where you're going to start making your build. So choose whatever 1 cost spell you want, and start striking out into the level that you began in and kill all the enemies. You'll find usually a couple of these blue spheres on levels that will give you 1 SP each, so you want to pick these up to continue expanding your abilities. And you'll also find other types of rewards on each level, depending on the level that you choose. Once you kill all the enemies on a level, it gets completed, and you have this auto explore button that you can just tap real quick, and it will quickly have your wizard go through the level and pick up all of the rewards. So if you don't want to like click each of them individually, you can just with 1 button press have all the rewards get picked up, which is pretty nice. And then you will see 3 different rifts that will open up on the level, and each one leads to another level, and you can hover over the rifts to preview what kinds of enemies will appear, as well as what kinds of rewards will show up at that rift. And at any time you can just click a rift and it will sort of zoom in on it to show you what the screen will look like. And then if you want, you can just press escape and back out and look at another rift, or you can click anywhere in that rift to spawn your wizard there, and that will then become the next level that you choose. 2 of the biggest differences between the second game and the first game are a couple of changes to how your general power works. So one of the differences is upgrading spells. In the previous game, you could choose to upgrade your spells whenever you wanted with some sort of generic upgrades, by which I mean, like extra range, extra damage, kind of basic stuff like that. And you could upgrade each spell multiple times when just incrementally increase these stats and make them more powerful. The way that upgrades work now is much more exciting and a little bit different. Now you can spend SP to upgrade any spell that you've currently purchased, And each upgrade is mutually exclusive, so you can only choose one of the usually 3 or 4 upgrades, I think 3, that every spell has. But in exchange for only being able to pick one of them, they're all much more powerful and have much more pronounced effects for each spell. And they're also unique to each spell. You're not going to see any generic upgrades at all, which is pretty impressive given the number of spells that are in the game. And these upgrades can do anything from completely changing the damage type, so making it more effective against different sorts of enemies, because enemies can have resistances and weaknesses to different damage types. It could also vastly increase its range and make it to where you don't have to target it with line of sight anymore, so you can actually hit enemies with it that you can't see, and some other things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can use these spells. So you're kind of juggling the idea for each level between getting new spells and upgrading the spells that you currently have, since they both take SP to do. There are also passive abilities that you can spend spell points on, which just generally link into different types of spells, like different elemental types, or whether it's a nature spell or a blood spell or a summoning spell or what have you. And you can use these various passive abilities to just increase your power in different ways. They're usually really expensive. They cost quite a lot of SP, but they are super powerful, and since they affect your entire character rather than a spell upgrade only affecting that one spell, it means depending on your build and what you're specialized to do, they can be really effective and actually really efficient uses of SP sometimes. Once you have a spell, you just tap its number key to cast it, and you'll notice that every spell has a limited number of casts. You don't have like an MP gauge or anything. Instead, every spell comes with a specific number, and whenever you purchase a spell, when you're on the spells menu, it'll tell you how many charges it has. So every use uses 1 charge, although there are some spells that cost your health instead, mostly like blood spells and a couple of summoning things, so they're quite powerful usually, but you gotta be really careful about using your health for stuff in this game because healing is extremely rare. You can also find mana potions as one of the various rewards that can be on the ground in any given level. You will also start with 1 mana potion no matter what, but these are highly valuable because they fully restore all charges for all spells you currently have, so they're a complete reset, so you want to really make the best use of them possible. At any time, you can also just hover your mouse over anything that you want an explanation for, and it will tell you on the right side of the screen. This game is really good at not hiding any information at all from the player. It gives you everything you could possibly need to know, even in hard numbers if you need. So you can just hover your mouse over any enemy, and it will tell you the enemy's name, how much health it has, what kind of damage it does, how much damage it does, if it has range, if it can fly, if it has passives. It tells you everything about it. So that's really the main gameplay loop. You're going through these rifts one after another to get the various rewards that you want to actually obtain, depending on what's available in each rift, and slowly expanding your arsenal of spells and upgrading your spells and giving yourself passive abilities and things, and figuring out how best to deal with the various different enemy types and all of their characteristics depending on the sort of build that you're going for. This means that this is a game with a massive amount of strategy and huge amounts of variety in it because of the absurd number of spells and upgrades for each one and stuff, and the way that they all interact with enemies in different ways. It means that every run pretty much feels different than every other run because you can try so many different things. You can find all sorts of other consumables around the place that can be really advantageous if deployed in the right strategic scenario, but of course can also be easily wasted if you're not paying attention when using them. And the other of the 2 big differences that the sequel has over the original is equipment. So you will find these chests occasionally, and they have different pieces of equipment in them, and you can actually have and equip various different pieces of gear. And you can just hover over a chest at any time and it'll tell you what's in it. And in fact, if you before you go through a rift, it'll tell you if it has a chest, and it'll tell you all the possible rewards. When a chest has a bunch of rewards, you get to pick one. It's not randomized. You will get to pick every time. You don't have to be at the mercy of RNG or anything. You can deliberately choose whichever one of them you want. And items are basically like build accentuating pieces of gear. They're all pretty powerful equipment that can have some really significant effects depending on what it is, and finding the right one that gels well with whatever you're building at the time can hugely benefit you and can completely change the course of a run. So it's just yet more depth that this game has that it adds to each run. So if you're a fan of classic roguelikes, this is a really, really good one to try. If you're not sure, then just kind of maybe look at a couple other gameplay videos for this game to get a better idea of the amount of variety and strategy on offer, because it's a really good time. It's an excellent classic roguelike, but it's also just a really good RPG in general to try if you're a fan of the more strategic way of doing things. So it is very hard, though, I will warn you. It might just be that I'm really really bad at it, that's also very possible, but I do think it is overall on the more difficult side of the roguelike spectrum. And the other game I wanted to take a look at is Path of Achra, which is a really interesting time because it is massively varied. It's definitely inspired by games like Tome, and also I think Rift Wizard, the first one, which is kind of funny. And it's also, I want to say, almost inspired by things like Triangle Wizard and stuff, although I'm not sure about that one. I don't know if the developers ever heard of that, but it does kind of give me similar vibes to that. And this game is all about build variety. It's all about giving you an absurd number of options to create and sort of workshop a build and go through increasingly difficult levels of enemies to see if you can reach the end. When you start this game, you will be probably overwhelmed a little bit until you realize that most of the stuff is locked at first, so it does kind of ease you into its variety, which is nice. But the way the character creation works is you have this screen, which is just a massive list of all the different things that you can choose to be, which is amazing. You have a sort of race, as well as a culture, and a god or a religion that you follow. And you can pick any three. Just choose a combination of three of these things, and that'll be your character. And they affect everything from your maximum health to your starting stat pool to the amount of gear that you start with and all sorts of things like that. And also the religion that you start as is very important because of the prayer system, which we'll get in a minute. But once you have your selection made and you have your custom character created, you can start a run. Another game that this very heavily reminds me of, but again, I don't have any proof that there's a direct inspiration here, is Lost Labyrinth, specifically Lost Labyrinth DX, which is a free roguelike that's a ton of fun, and I highly recommend that you try out if you're a fan of classic roguelikes. But it has a similar amount of like huge build variety and all these different specific ways to make a build, but it uses sort of a point-buy system instead. So the way that runs work in this game is very similar to Rift Wizard, where you will have a screen and you can see everything on screen at once, although unlike Rift Wizard, there is a line of sight system where if something is out of your sight, you can't see it, but the screen doesn't scroll. You have the whole screen at all times. And then on a screen, there will be several different enemies for you to face and a portal out to the next screen. Once you complete usually about 3 of these screens, although this can change depending on how far you are through the game, the last area will have some equipment on the ground that you can pick up, some items, as well as a bunch more tough enemies. And then once you are finished with that, you will go to a sort of world map-like screen where you'll be able to choose a path. And there are usually 2 or 3 different choices of path, and hovering over one will show you the enemies that you'll face, as well as the pieces of equipment that you'll find on the final screen of that area. And you then click whichever one looks good to you, and you go into it and repeat the process until you progress all the way through the world map and get to the spire at the end. Although there is, of course, some stuff after the spire, a sort of true final boss that you can face if you make it that far. But the interesting thing about how this game's mechanics work is that it's all sort of focused not on active skills or castable abilities, but instead on conditional abilities, basically stuff that activates automatically when specific conditions are met. So once you start a game, you'll have some skill points you can spend on this absolutely massive tree of skills that you can choose all sorts of different damage types and build types to make however you want. And yes, you can mix and match all of these to create unique builds. So when you combine all of these various skills with all of the different choices you have when creating a character, you can see why there's such a massive amount of build variety in this game. But something you'll notice about all of these skills is that none of them are active. They all activate automatically on conditions, so whenever you attack, one of them might change your damage type, or whenever you block an attack with your armor, one of them might do something, or whenever you start a new screen, one of them might do something, stuff like that. They all have different automatically activated conditions that you've got to meet to make them work. And of course, the idea behind this game is to make yourself as overpowered as possible. This is a game about deliberately breaking the game and becoming OP. That's what you want to do. You want to create a sequence of these conditional skills that all activate in chains and cause a sort of feedback loop to make you really powerful. You want to click once and have a huge cascade of stuff go off that just clears the whole screen, or summons 80,000 skeletons or something, because that's what the game is about. You also have glory, which is basically XP. Every time you enter a new screen, you'll get a chunk of glory, and also every time you kill enemies, you'll get glory depending on their strength. And when you glory up, you'll gain a level, and you can spend a skill point on one of your primary stats, like strength, dexterity, willpower, stuff like that. And it'll tell you exactly what one point will do, so you always know. And these will just help to make you stronger, and also, of course, every time you gain a level, you get one of those skill points that you can spend on that massive skill tree to unlock more stuff. You'll always have to save up more than one skill point to unlock a new skill. The cheapest skills cost 2, and some of them can go all the way up to like 5 or even more than that, so you do have to save up for a while to get new ones. You also have a limit of how many of these skills you can have at once. There's a sort of a bar above the skill tree that shows you how many you can have in a row, and also you can upgrade skills you currently have. So it's not always about buying new ones, it's also about paying skill points to enhance the ones that you currently possess, and they will show you in the description what gets enhanced every time you level them up. Now you also have lots of different equipment because, like I said, at the end of every one of the several screen zones that you can go through, there will be some equipment on the ground that you can pick up. And there's quite a lot of equipment variety, actually, and they really are build accentuating gear items, basically. They all have pretty specific things that they do that are only good for certain builds. So you're going to find a lot of equipment that you don't really want to use because they're for something else. You know, maybe in another run you would want that, but in this one you need something else. And because of that, you can sacrifice any items you don't want, which will permanently improve your maximum HP by a small amount every time. But you can equip whatever else you want to make yourself stronger, and like I said, they have a ton of different effects, and they often link into specific types of nodes or damage types on the skill tree that make them really powerful for one or two specific kinds of builds. So you just want to find what works for you, which is why you get a preview of what gear will drop at the end of each zone so that you know if you want to choose one that's worth your time, basically. This game also has a pretty punishing way of making sure you only equip what you need, because it has an encumbrance system where every piece of gear has an encumbrance value and you have a strength value, and if your encumbrance ever exceeds your strength, then it will start to slow you down. And being slowed down is a really bad thing for a lot of builds in this game, because everyone in classic roguelike style takes their turns at once, but if you're really slow, it might take multiple turns of the world before you can get one turn. So enemies will get to act multiple times per time you get to act once. So you really don't want your encumbrance to get too high unless you have a ton of strength to back it up. There's also an instability stat, which is, I think, represented by the idea that spellcasters shouldn't wear heavy armor, basically, because if you have a ton of instability, then it will start to divide your willpower, which is your main damage stat. So you'll do less spell damage if you have really heavy armor on, and would instead be more reliant on the weapon that you're holding, weapon damage, pure attacks and stuff. So this is basically a really granular sandbox, by which I mean it's like a building sandbox where there's a ridiculous amount of variety and you just sort of make whatever you want each run, but at the same time there's a lot of detail in terms of both you and how you can build, but also the enemies. At any time you can examine enemies and they actually have several passive perks and stuff that are unique to them. Every single enemy has stuff like this, so you can examine them before you actually go to a zone if you want on the world map, in order to just see what they can do. And this becomes more and more of a good idea later on once you get to the mini boss and boss level big demons and stuff that have all sorts of powerful effects that you really do need to avail yourself of before you go and smack them in the head. But overall, Path of Achra is a fantastic sandboxy break the game kind of experience that is very challenging. So far I've managed to beat it once. It also gives you really specific achievements, which I kind of appreciate. It gave me an achievement just because I beat it using only death magic, and it also gave me an achievement because I was a specific prestige class called the Doomsayer. Oh yeah, prestige classes, by the way. Once you get a certain number of skill points in that giant skill tree, you can unlock various different prestige classes to switch into, usually around 25 or so, and they're just a huge number of them, of course, and they provide all sorts of nice extra passive benefits that enhance whatever that school of ability does. You've also got the prayers that I mentioned earlier. You start out with just one prayer, and it has a certain number of charges, and you can just use it whenever you want. It's your only active ability that you'll have in this entire game. The only things where you can press a button to activate a skill are the prayers. Each prayer does something specific, and then it'll tell you how you restore the charges of it. So each prayer has a different way of getting more charges to use it again. And once you get a certain level of glory, once you level up a certain number of times, you'll unlock a second and a third prayer that also do powerful things and have their own ways to get charges of them. And the 3 prayers that you have as a character are determined by the god that you worship, which you choose at the beginning. So in terms of a really highly varied sandbox that's just fun to hop into, just sort of workshop a random build and see how far you can make it, this is one of the best roguelikes, I think, for that kind of experience, right up there with stuff like Lost Labyrinth DX. It's just a fantastic way to have that feeling of, you know, building a synergistic set of skills and stuff to be as powerful as possible, and just doing it completely different next time because there are so many different options that you can choose. So I recommend both of these games to people that just like strategy RPGs or classic roguelikes, or if you're not sure about classic roguelikes and you've only played modern ones that are, you know, real time and stuff like Hades, then I definitely do recommend trying to get into these more strategic turn-based ones, because there's a lot of value to be had here. There's a lot of gameplay. You can play these things for dozens to hundreds of hours oftentimes because of the amount of stuff there is for you to experience. So yeah, they're definitely well worthwhile, and I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store pages of both of these games so that you can go and check them out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.